This was a dangerous topic in a lot of ways, and people did not like to talk about it.
It's not in the textbooks. How is this possible?
It's an amazing, tragic story.
My father wants to be buried with the rifle.
Conditions needed to change.
They wanted to be treated as full human beings.
Lúis Tίκas.
Ilias Anastasius Spandidakis.
My father was named after this guy.
And you realize that at the other end of that car was a machine gun.
Lieutenant Linderfeld killed Tykes in cold blood.
This was killing. This was murder. And nobody ever went to prison for it.
It is Greek Easter in a small mining tent colony near Trinidad, Colorado. Miners are on strike in protest of the dangerous conditions in the Llandlow coal mine. They celebrate the end of a harsh winter and the coming of spring. But this brief peace would not last. In the early morning of April 20th, 1914, the Llandlow tent colony erupted into a conflict that claimed the lives of 4 miners, 2 women, and 11 young children. Though this labor conflict ended tragically, it raised national awareness about the necessity of mining unions and led to a compromise that still helps and protects miners today. In the 1880s, hard coal was discovered in Colorado's southern region, in Los Animas and Huerfano counties. Almost immediately, mining corporations industrialized the area. The largest of these operations was the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company, or CF&I. It was owned by John D. Rockefeller, Jr. As more and more of the state population became miners, union activism began. In 1890, the United Mine Workers of America was formed to protect miners across the country from the brutality of the mine owners and the severity of the conditions in the mines. But in much of the country, unions held very little clout, and as the number of coal mines escalated, more and more safety standards were ignored. In southern Colorado, the coal mines were known to be especially dangerous. Miners worked lying face down or kneeling, inhaling suffocating dust all day long. Between 1884 and 1912, 1,708 miners died in Colorado mines at a rate which doubled the national average. In early 1910, the workers at the Llandlow coal mine grew weary of the harsh conditions that crippled their lives. CF&I company thugs watched intently for union activists, but nevertheless, Lúis Tίκas, a young Greek miner, fought for his fellow workers' rights. With support from the United Mine Workers of America, the UMWA, Tίκas started to organize the miners. Over time, he was joined by John Lawson, a UMWA representative working undercover as a coal miner. As the situation at Llandlow grew more and more dire, their small band of activists grew. Their struggle for union representation became fiercer, less discreet. The miners were desperate for change. 3 years later, in 1913, Lúis Tίκas and the UMWA created a list of demands and presented it to CF&I. The demands included union recognition, higher pay, enforcement of the 8-hour workday law, the right to elect their own check weightmen, the right to trade at any store, and the right to choose their own boarding places and doctors, enforcement of the state mine laws, and abolition of the company guard system.
On September 23, 1913, Tίκas and Lawson declared a strike for all workers at the Llandlow coal mine. The protesters built tent colonies on a stretch of prairie between Walsenburg and Trinidad, Colorado. The largest of these was the Llandlow colony. Over 12,000 miners and their families lived here, compromising their livelihood and their safety, determined to right the injustices that plagued their lives. Tίκas and Lawson set up camp with the rest of the tents, but not before leaving CF&I with a promise. Until their list of demands were met, the strike would stay strong. Desperate for an early end to the protest, company officials hired strikebreakers from the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency and initiated a campaign of harassment against the strikers. This included beatings, murders, and the Death Special, an improvised armored car that would periodically spray the tents with machine gun fire. The mine operators were trying to create a conflict to goad the miners into retaliation. If they did, CF&I would get Colorado Governor Ammons to send the National Guard to break the strike. However, months later, the tent colony still stood. On April 19, 1914, the miners and their families gathered together to celebrate Greek Easter. They had survived one of the harshest winters in Colorado history, and, finally, spring approached. Although rumors of an assault had been circulating for days, no one suspected anything. They simply celebrated the holiday. They were caught completely off guard when, early the next morning, they were attacked. At 9:55, a bomb was fired into the tent colony. Minutes later, 3 more bombs exploded, and just as the strikers began to panic, a militia of Baldwin Felts detectives and Colorado National Guardsmen invaded the tent colony. They descended from the surrounding hills and shot bullets into the tents at random. These thugs, a Ludlow survivor said, were drawing double paychecks, one from the National Guard and one from CF&I. Gunmen and thugs were replacing state militia, and there was nothing the miners could do about it. The first casualty was an 11-year-old boy, Frank Snyder. He ran from shelter to get water for his 5 brothers and sisters. Snyder was shot in the head the moment he emerged from his tent. The day wore on. The National Guard's force grew to be almost 200 men. They were equipped with 2 machine guns. By 7 p.m., the tent colony had been burnt to the ground. 5 miners were dead. The charred remains of 2 unarmed women and 11 young children lay in the tent cellar where they were burned alive.
Dawn came. The tents were all burned down. Smoke was clearing. Word had gotten out about what had happened, and they discovered all these dead women and children. And it hit the newspapers.
The public was outraged. Even very pro-business publications like the Wall Street Journal wrote editorials condemning the Colorado governor, the heads of the coal company. I mean, anybody who reads about women and children dying, especially a lot of infants, is going to be outraged. So the leaders of the company, John Rockefeller among them, really took a beating in the press.
While the public's anger grew, mine workers from southern Colorado rallied in response to the massacre at Ludlow. They attacked CF&I officials, destroyed mines and buildings until their violence became so extreme that, around the nation, it became known as Colorado's Coalfield War. Over 160 people were killed in the 10 days of rioting. On that 10th day, Governor Ammons called for the National Guard to intervene. Then, the violence ended, the miners went back to work. Although the protest did not win union recognition from the company, it had a lasting impact on alerting the country to the harsh conditions that coal laborers were forced to work in, and to the importance of powerful worker unions. The next year, 1915, the Colorado General Assembly passed the Industrial Relations Act, giving the state's Director of Labor authority over conflicts between employers and employees. The Industrial Relations Act promoted negotiation and compromise rather than conflict and violence in solving problems between miners and company officials. John D. Rockefeller Jr. conducted a thorough investigation of the battle at Ludlow. Upon discovering the bad health of the miners and their negligence from CF&I, he compromised in implementing the Rockefeller Plan, a collection of reforms for mines and company towns. In the early 1920s, a series of hearings by the Commission on Industrial Relations were held in Washington, D.C. These included testimony from witnesses such as John D. Rockefeller Jr., John Lawson, and Josephine Roach, the owner of the Rocky Mountain Fuel Company, or the RMFC. As Roach heard the stories of the Ludlow Massacre's survivors, she decided to improve the lives of her own company's workers. Upon returning to Colorado, she helped unionize all of RMFC's mines. In this, Roach established a strong compromise between her company and its workers. The Ludlow Massacre marked a critical point in labor history. Though it ended violently and fruitlessly, it showed the country that there was a need for union protection in its coal mines. It also serves as a reminder for us today. The fight for workers' rights still continues. Mining accidents in Louisiana, Kentucky, and Utah have brought national attention to mine safety. In each of these situations, the mining unions did not carry the power that they needed to make change.
On the desolate stretch of prairie where, once, the charcoal remains of the Laldlou tent colony smoldered, where the bloodiest conflict in U.S. labor history played out, where men, women, and children were murdered for wanting better lives, there is a monument. It is a small testament to the blood spilt in the conflict for Union power, a testament to the compromise that would ultimately allow miners in Colorado and across the nation the authority to negotiate for their rights. It stands as a silent reminder that freedom has a price. It stands as a tribute to those who are willing to pay it.